It feels like we've been waiting forever for the Las Vegas Raiders season to begin, and now that it's here, it has flown by. We're already at the point where the Raiders' final game of the season is just 2 days away. Unfortunately, the Raiders won't be making it to the playoffs, so we won't see them play into January or February. But before the season ends, there's one last game to discuss, and there are some key things to look out for in this match. I'll also be sharing some recent updates, including news about the Raiders' former offensive coordinator, Luke Edey, as well as a wild card at the quarterback position. This morning, I watched a kid's tape that I'll share my thoughts on, along with a look at Aidan OConnell. More on that later. But first, let's dive into the Raiders' game against the Chargers. The injury report is in, and fortunately, most of the Raiders are healthy. However, we've lost Amir Abdullah, who had a great game last week, rushing for over 100 yards for the first time this season. Unfortunately, he injured his foot, so he'll be out for the rest of the season. With just one game left, that's a tough loss for the team. On the positive side, Nate Hobbs is dealing with an illness but might still play, and aside from that, the Raiders are looking pretty good health-wise, compared to earlier in the season when several key players like Coe and Wilkins were out for the season. As for the Chargers, they're mostly healthy as well, though they will be without their starting running back, Gus Edwards. Now, why does this game matter? The Raiders' position in the draft is at stake, with the team currently holding the 8th overall pick. After winning the last 2 games, we've dropped down from having the 1st overall pick. If the Raiders win this game, the worst-case scenario is that we'll fall to the 10th pick, though other teams with similar records may win as well, potentially changing the draft order. The Raiders should focus on winning this game, not just for the draft, but also for Aidan OConnell, who has a chance to prove himself in his final game of the season. Additionally, the Raiders need to develop a winning mentality. The offensive coordinator had what I'd call the best game of the season last week in terms of consistency, and things seem to be improving. On the Chargers' side, a loss to the Raiders could hurt their playoff seeding. The Chargers are hoping the Pittsburgh Steelers lose to the Bengals, as that would determine whether the Chargers play as the 5th or 6th seed. If the Chargers lose to the Raiders, they'll be the 6th seed and face the tough task of playing the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs. However, if they beat the Raiders, they'll secure the 5th seed and play the Houston Texans, which is a much more favorable matchup. The Ravens have been playing incredibly well, and the Chargers would have a much better chance against the Texans, who have been on a downward slide after a strong start to the season. For the Raiders, this game is also about seeing some individual players in action. It's the final game of the season, so it's the last chance to see how players like Glaze perform, especially with a tough matchup ahead against some of the Chargers' top pass rushers, including Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, and second-year defensive end Tuli Tuipulotu. These are strong players, and the Raiders will need to step up their game on both offense and defense. I've been keeping an eye on Glaze this season, and I'm really excited to see how he finishes the year. Early on, around weeks 8 or 9, I had some doubts about him. I wasn't fully convinced he could be a solid NFL tackle. But over the past few weeks, DJ has shown incredible growth. It's typical for rookies to improve as they gain more experience, and Glaze has really stepped up his game. This final game of the season could be his chance to finish strong and carry that momentum into the offseason. With more time to develop, I believe DJ has the potential to become a really strong right tackle in the NFL. He might not reach the top-tier level yet, but he's definitely on track to be a dependable player, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd tier of tackles, similar to Colton Miller, solid long-term tackles who perform well, but aren't necessarily in the absolute top 10. It's exciting to see where he can go from here. We're also expecting Jackson Johnson to be at left guard again, especially since Jordan Meredith is questionable. It's less critical where Johnson plays at this point, as either position would give him valuable experience. For him, the next season should see him step into a starting center role, but for now, it's good to see him gaining more reps. There are other players like Trey Taylor, Isaiah Powell, and Try Murr, who I'd like to see get some playtime too. With the season winding down, this is the perfect opportunity to see if they're worth keeping around for next year. Isaiah Powell, in particular, is a restricted free agent, so the Raiders will have the chance to bring him back if they want. However, since Powell isn't a player the current management is familiar with, his future on the team isn't guaranteed. He's had some solid performances, though, especially over the past couple of weeks, so it'll be interesting to see how the Raiders handle that decision. On the defensive side, young players like Jaxson have been standing out, and it'll be interesting to see if the team chooses to keep them as they move forward. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Luke Getsy. The former Raiders offensive coordinator has found a new role with the Green Bay Packers. According to recent reports, Getsy has been working with the Packers defense, helping them understand what opposing offenses are trying to do. This is similar to the role Robert Saleh had when he was helping oversee the Packers offense. Even though Getsy wasn't a great play caller or offensive installer, he does have a solid understanding of the game. His knowledge of offensive schemes and concepts has made him a valuable asset to Green Bay's defense as they prepare for the playoffs. It's interesting to see how his experience with the Raiders and now with the Packers could play out, especially as the Packers gear up for a playoff push. Looking back at the season, I can't help but reflect on how critical Luke Getsy's performance was for the Raiders. At the start of the year, I said that the Raiders' success would hinge on how well Luke Getsy did as a coach. And now, as the season wraps up, we can compare his impact with that of Scott Turner, the new offensive coordinator. When Getsy was with the Raiders, the offense ranked 25th in yards, while Turner's offense came in at 13th. The point totals for both coordinators were similar, but the difference in yardage is notable. It's clear that the Raiders' offensive struggles this season had a lot to do with the coaching changes and adjustments. The Raiders' offense, under Scott Turner, is showing improvement. While the team isn't necessarily scoring more points, there's a noticeable increase in yards gained. This is important because it signals that the offense is finding more success in moving the ball downfield, even though points aren't always following. A big reason for this is the current struggles at the quarterback position, but there's hope that the Raiders can address this issue heading into next season. Scott Turner has shown he's a competent offensive coordinator, something that wasn't always the case with Luke Getsy. The offensive growth under Turner is clear, even if it hasn't yet translated into consistent scoring. As we look ahead, the key for the Raiders will be figuring out the quarterback situation and finding the right pieces to build on this offensive foundation. Speaking of quarterbacks, there's been some interesting talk about Aidan OConnell's future. Head coach Antonio Pierce was recently asked about OConnell's role next season, and Pierce expressed confidence that Aidan could be a starting NFL quarterback next year. This statement is intriguing, especially because there's still uncertainty surrounding both Pierce's future with the team and OConnell's role. While nothing is guaranteed, it's possible that OConnell could be the Raiders' starting quarterback next season. Looking at OConnell's performance this year, there has been noticeable growth. As a rookie, he's shown improvement, and that's expected as he continues to develop. However, there are still some areas where OConnell needs to improve. For him to succeed, he would need a great offensive line, a strong offensive coordinator, and playmakers around him. In the right situations, similar to how Jared Goff is thriving with the Detroit Lions, OConnell could find success. But without those key elements, it's hard to see how he can lead the team effectively. The Raiders have been moving the ball better lately, getting into scoring range more consistently, but the issue has been converting those opportunities into touchdowns. Once the field shrinks, passing lanes tighten, and quarterbacks need to be able to create plays. This is where top quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, and Josh Allen shine. They improvise in the red zone, turning drives into touchdowns instead of field goals. Until the Raiders find a franchise quarterback with those abilities, the team will continue to struggle in key moments. Looking at potential future quarterbacks, Jaxson Dart has been catching attention with his performances recently. Dart has been impressive at Ole Miss, putting up solid numbers over the past few seasons. Against Duke, he showed his skills once again, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. According to reports from NFL scouts, Dart could be a sleeper in this year's draft class, potentially even going in the first round. He's amassed over 10,000 passing yards, nearly 1,500 rushing yards, and 85 total touchdowns during his college career, which is certainly impressive. Scouts believe Dart has the potential to be a really good NFL quarterback. That said, it's important to keep in mind that the level of competition he's faced at Ole Miss is different from the top-tier teams like Georgia or Michigan, so the context of his performance matters. Nonetheless, Jaxson Dart is definitely a name to watch in the quarterback draft conversation. Jaxson Dart has been drawing attention for his impressive play, particularly in a recent game against Duke. While Duke may not have NFL-caliber defenders, Dart showcased remarkable throws, including one where he sprinted to the left under pressure, then launched a 50-yard crossbody pass to his wide receiver. His ability to make such throws under pressure has sparked interest, particularly from NFL scouts. Dart's potential is undeniable, but as the analysis points out, it's important to consider the competition he's faced at Ole Miss. Against stronger teams like Georgia or Michigan, it would be a different test. Nonetheless, Dart has displayed potential that could translate well into the NFL, particularly if placed in a favorable system like Kyle Shanahan's offense or similar schemes. The evolving landscape of quarterbacks in the NFL and upcoming drafts suggests that quarterbacks like Dart, Aidan OConnell, and even Jalen Milroe could be successful with the right system and coaching. It's becoming increasingly clear that quarterbacks who thrive within structured offenses can succeed, even if they aren't generational talents like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. The key factor is finding an offensive coordinator who can maximize the player's strengths and minimize weaknesses. As an example, look at how quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold have revived their careers in favorable systems. If the Raiders, or any team, could land one of these quarterbacks and pair them with a great offensive coordinator, they could thrive, despite not having elite natural skills. Regarding potential quarterback picks for the Raiders, players like Dart, Carson Beck, and even Jalen Milroe could be available in the draft. There's also a chance that other options, like Shedder Sanders, may be available in the second round. While the first round could be dominated by the top quarterbacks like Caleb Williams, the second round could present opportunities to find a capable quarterback with high upside. The key for the Raiders or any team looking to draft a quarterback will be having the right coaching staff in place, especially experienced coordinators like Norv Turner and Scott Turner. These coaches could potentially identify a quarterback in the draft and develop them into a long-term starter. The right coaching staff can turn raw talent into a winning player, so the choice of quarterback is just one part of the puzzle. Before wrapping up, there's a quick shout out to the channel's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. The creator shares some final picks for the week, specifically betting on Lamar Jackson to throw for at least 3 touchdowns. The bet involves a $10 entry with potential payouts of $574, highlighting some key matchups and records on the line as the season closes out. In the final section, the focus shifts to various NFL players and their upcoming performances as the season closes. Lamar Jackson is eyeing the MVP award and is determined to have a big game, aiming for at least 3 or 4 touchdowns. The prediction is that Lamar will surpass 3 touchdowns in his final game, as he seeks to end the season with a strong performance. Kyler Murray is another player to watch, as he needs just 56 yards to secure a significant bonus worth $800,000 to $900,000. This financial incentive is expected to motivate him to push for those yards, although the risk of betting on his yards might be high, especially for a quarterback unless there's a specific record or payout on the line. Brock Bowers, a standout player, is considered the favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, with many predicting he will score at least 1 touchdown, either rushing or receiving, in his final game. The comparison with Jaden Daniels is mentioned, but the argument is made that Daniels' stats are not significantly better than Caleb Williams, whereas Bowers has set records and has had an exceptional season, making him a top contender for the award. Aidan OConnell, who may be starting his final game of the season, or potentially for the Raiders next year, is also expected to have a strong performance, especially with the possibility of the Chargers resting their starters if the Steelers win. O'Connell has thrown for over 225 yards in each of the last 2 weeks, so a big game against the Chargers is anticipated. Lastly, the creator wraps up with a plug for Underdog Fantasy, highlighting a final $10 entry with a $574 payout, and encourages viewers to support the platform that has supported the channel throughout the season. The video ends with a thank you to viewers and a request for feedback in the comments. It's a mix of player predictions, season reflections, and a call to action for audience engagement, all wrapped into a final look at the closing stages of the NFL season.